I'm going to save you a lot of relationship drama today.
Whoa, you're so big.
My body is huge.
I always tell my boyfriend not to worry about you because you're like a brother to me. And you're like always there. And you're gay.
Yeah, I'm gay.
Now that you're gay and you're my gay bestie, can we practice having and play house?
If there is one thing that will cause relationship drama to the point of nasty fights and even breakups, that would be how you both handle people of the opposite sex outside of your relationship. That would include everyone from ex-boyfriends or ex-girlfriends to platonic friends, all the way to those orbiters that would want to interfere or sabotage your relationship. And you guys know it. If you're watching this video right now, chances are you have been through relationship struggles because some woman you were seeing had been maybe a little too friendly with that guy at work, or perhaps she entertained conversations that she shouldn't have with an ex or some guy who liked her, right? Or perhaps maybe you were too flirty with a friend of hers and you got yourself in trouble. This is about setting appropriate boundaries with the opposite sex. And the funny thing is, every guy listening to this and dating someone or who has dated someone knows that this is going to come up at some point. Yet, funny enough, even though you guys know this is a thing, no one usually thinks about talking about these things before the relationship even starts. Some men might actually get married to a girl without ever having had these discussions, only to later on find their wives meeting up with some old fling for a coffee and then having her act outraged when the husband has a problem with it. It's just so crazy to me how some people will behave and how, if you don't set proper boundaries, they're just going to do crazy things in the relationship. It just is mind blowing. In my coaching, I have seen the most intelligent and most reasonable women just turn completely 180 on their guys, being mad at her man for him having any objection to an inappropriate behavior towards other men. So it's crazy. It happens. And the question is, why put yourself through all that craziness when it could all be so easily avoided just by having a simple discussion about boundaries before any serious commitment happens? What is an early frame announcement? So an early frame announcement is where you send a message either indirectly or directly on what the psychological framework is going to be if things move forward into a relationship in the future. Now, there's a lot of ways to do this, but in this case, when talking about boundaries with other men, you're going to be very direct. You don't want any ambiguity here. You're going to have an open and clear conversation, preferably before you enter into the commitment with this person. Now, what is great about this is that you will find out very early on through a simple discussion whether or not she is capable of having healthy boundaries with other men, or if she's not capable. And you can find this out before getting into some serious relationship with her, getting into a crazy entanglement, or getting into deep with her emotionally. Now, how are you going to bring this up? Well, it's pretty easy. You'll just look for a circumstance where it's appropriate. And timing wise, the best time to do this is when you've been dating where she considers you a potential guy for a long-term relationship, but you're just not there yet. All right. So you're not at the serious commitment, but she's considering the long-term relationship with you. And timing wise, in terms of days or weeks, this usually is around week 4 to 8. So if you're dating someone for about 4 to 8 weeks, you can look for these opportunities. And what you're looking for is a circumstance to introduce this early frame discussion about other men. Let me give you an example. Let's say that an ex-boyfriend reaches out to the girl you're dating and she tells you about it. You might say something like, well, I really appreciate you telling me, even though technically we're just dating right now and not in a serious relationship yet, where you would have to tell me about these things. But because you are sharing this with me now, that tells me that you likely would have really good boundaries with exes if we were in a serious relationship. So that's really refreshing to hear. And I see that as a good thing. And I think it's good that we're talking about it. Now she'll then respond or whatever she responds, and then that can open the discussion about boundaries and standards with the opposite sex in general and what the expectations are. So that's just an example of how it can be introduced. And there's so many different ways, right? This early frame announcement, which is really more of a clear discussion, we'll go over one of three ways. So, one way is she might be totally on board with your boundaries and standards. And maybe she'll even be a little bit relieved that you guys are talking about it. You see, a woman who is healthy will have her own concerns as to whether or not you're going to have good boundaries with other women. So, this opens the door for her to get more of a sense of security in knowing that you're the type of guy she can trust if things develop into a serious relationship. Now, that is the best case scenario, but the problem is that scenario is pretty rare, right? You see, the reaction of her being cooperative and relieved to have this discussion with you only happens when she has good social conditioning and if she isn't someone who is manipulative and deceptive and wanting to open the doors for cheating later on. Since most women in 2025 have poor social conditioning when it comes to relationships and men in general, that usually means you aren't going to get this dream scenario. All right. But if you do, awesome. Now, again, the beauty of opening up this discussion early on is if a woman is inclined to be deceptive, she won't cooperate with this conversation very well. And that is the second possible reaction, where she completely stonewalls any discussion about healthy boundaries or standards with other men. And this can show up in many different ways. She might just act bored and aloof with the conversation, as if it's a dumb conversation and it's not important. Or she might just try to make jokes about it and not take it very seriously. Or she might try to change the subject. Or she might argue with you or push back on what you think would be a reasonable boundary, or try to minimalize your mental framework and your stance on the issue. So there are many ways that this could look, but they all send the same message. And that message is, I'm not participating in this discussion. Now, the problem with her choosing to not participate in a discussion about boundaries is the deeper message that she is actually saying to you. And that deeper message is quite extensive. What she's basically saying when she stonewalls the conversation is she's saying this: I don't want to talk about clear boundaries because I want things to be ambiguous. That way, I can do whatever I want with other men and still get what I want from you. In fact, by not having clear boundaries, I can manipulate you by getting angry and indignant if you try to set any boundary at all when it comes to the guys that I talk to. And by not having clear boundaries, I can blame you for being insecure and I can act victimized by you for not trusting me, even though I'm not behaving in a way that's trustworthy. And in fact, by not having clearly communicated boundaries, I can make you out to be the problem by saying you have trust issues and you're insecure, when all the while I'm the one opening doors to fuck other men and to have inappropriate relationships behind your back. Whoa, right? Like, that's a lot, isn't it? All right. And that's basically the message when she won't have a conversation about boundaries. Deceptive women who have patterns of nurturing inappropriate side relationships with other guys will usually stonewall any attempts at talking about clear boundaries in a warm but direct manner. The reason is because she wants things to be vague so that she can manipulate the situation. So if you try to have this conversation and you are stonewalled, you know that this is a serious problem. And it goes without saying that you should never be emotionally invested in or committed to a relationship like this. Now, the third response is a little less extreme than that, and it's a lot more common. The third response is where she's willing to participate in the frame discussion about boundaries with men, but she will have some uneasiness and discomfort with some of the boundaries. If your boundaries are reasonable, then this just means that she has poor social conditioning and that it is going to take some time and going to take some mental processing and effort on her part to get comfortable with being in your frame in a future commitment. So she might feel like she's losing her freedom, for example, with some of the boundaries, or she might worry that you're being too controlling or whatever. And this makes sense because most women grew up in a society filled with simps who never told her no or never challenged her in any healthy way. And she's been conditioned to believe that men shouldn't have boundaries really, and that men should just lay down and get walked on by the women that they are with and that they're dating. And no one has told her what an appropriate boundary actually looks like. So she'll just feel uncomfortable and might push back a little bit. And she doesn't necessarily intend to be deceptive or cheat in the future. She's just having difficulty. Now, is this workable? Maybe. Just please, for your own sake, take my advice and don't commit until you sort this thing out. All right. Or you're going to be in for a lot of fights and drama in your future. So now that you have the idea of an early frame announcement, what boundaries do you actually set? What are the specifics? What do you actually talk about? Now, most of you are going to make the mistake of having ridiculous conversations that are really vague and really like about obvious things that everyone can agree on. And it doesn't challenge her in any way. So you might say things like, I don't put up with cheating, or I don't think a woman should keep an ex around or have inappropriate sexting with other men. The problem with stating these very obvious things and having these obvious conversations that everyone can get on board with is it just makes the conversation meaningless. It doesn't describe actual problems that you're going to run into. And it certainly doesn't cover the nuances of those problems. And what it really does, having these meaningless conversations, is it allows her to do all sorts of mental gymnastics later on in the relationship to manipulate the situation. So a better approach is to give her a set of principles and values to get behind, and then let the specific boundaries come from those values. So, for example, I recommend that you present a principle and a value that you both as individuals no longer have friends that are of the opposite sex. Instead, it's a we thing. So you tell her that, hey, your guy friend is not your friend, meaning that he has to at least want to be friends with me too. So he doesn't just get to be your friend where you get to have secret meetings with him where he tries to sabotage your relationship. He needs to be friends with both of us. See, by having the principle that as a couple, you both have friends together instead of private secret relationships with people of the opposite sex, so many problems are now mitigated. Now, if later on she wants to go meet with an old friend for coffee, then why aren't you both meeting him? You see, this isn't a secret meeting with a guy outside of the relationship. He's either the friend of both of you, where you both could meet him, or he wants to at least meet you potentially, or there is no friendship at all. You see how that works? As you can see, what you want to discuss with her are the principles and values that you have as a couple so that you can tailor those principles and ideas towards what behavior is appropriate for various different circumstances. Now, there are many ways to do this, so I'm going to leave that up to you. But if you want to discuss these things further and in greater detail and get into the categories of what male friendships are for women and ways to work on specific boundaries, click the link below and get into my school community. It's free, and we can talk about these things further. What should the boundaries based on principles be with, let's say, an ex? And how do those principles or boundaries change if there's a child in the picture that they share together, or if they work together? What principles are we following when it comes to male and female friends alike? These are all very nuanced questions that can vary slightly from situation to situation. And this is why you want to have principles for her to get behind. So there are values for her to fall back on when circumstances change. So get into my community and let's discuss this a lot more. Let's get into those specific circumstances. I will see you there.